faithfulness to be in the house of God. That's another thing. I told you, I'm having to learn a song that I've never heard before to perform at the funeral. And I can learn a song in 3 days, but don't know that I can learn it as well as I would want to. But anyway, y'all pray for me. Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. I've been in Ephesians all day long today. It's a great book. Stand with me if you would. I'm going to begin reading in Ephesians chapter 5, and I'm going to begin reading in verse number, let's see. Verse number 15. I'll pick up in verse number 15 here. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse number 15. And the Bible says, "See then that ye walk circumspectly." That's looking in every direction. Circum means circle, looking all the way around. Keep your head on a swivel. That's what it means. "Not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Wherefore, be not unwise, but understanding what the will of the Lord is." Father, bless the reading of your word. Use it for your honor and glory. And I pray these things in thy name. Amen. Thank you. You may be seated. We had discussed last week in our foundation series the will of God. Staying in the will of God, and we talked about the principles of that and what it means to be in the will of God. We read, of course, over Romans 12. It says, "I beseech you, therefore, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed unto this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." You can know the will of God for your life in any given situation, whether that be which job to work, which career to follow, which college to pick, definitely which mate to choose for life. You can know these things. But it begins by having a life that is set apart to God's service. "Be not conformed unto this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind." A carnal mind cannot know the will of God. The will of God is a spiritual matter, and it takes a spiritual mindset, a mindset that is yielded to the will of God in order to find the will of God. Most people pray about the will of God, something to this effect: "Lord, this is what I'm going to do, and I hope you're okay with that." And if God doesn't strike you the next day with a bolt of lightning, then you figure God's okay with that. That is not how we determine the will of God. But those who are able to discern the will of God do so because they walk in the Spirit, as it says in Ephesians chapter 5. They are separated from the world. They walk in the Spirit. They walk in guidance of the Holy Spirit. And Ephesians chapter 5, verse 17 says, "Wherefore, be not unwise, but understanding what the will of the Lord is." Paul says in Romans 12:2 that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. The will of God should be our priority, but you're not going to find it in carnal terms. You must be walking a spiritual life to find it. Okay, so from a very practical aspect, how do I discern the will of God on a daily basis? I could talk to you about how I determine the will of God in coming to be pastor here in Iowa 20 years ago. And there are a lot of ideas, and I heard things. I was asked certain questions like, do you believe this is the will of God? And I said, yes, I believe I know this is the will of God for me to go to Iowa. 20 years later, I'm absolutely convinced I never made a mistake in that matter. I know it's the will of God that I'm here. I am right in the middle of God's will, doing what God wanted me to do the way He wanted me to do it. Now, but I'd have people say things like, well, do you have peace about it? What does that look like? And my answer to that question was a resounding no. Right now, I'm in, I've been through a very, I had been through a tremendous battle spiritually and psychologically. We'd been through a very difficult time. And quite frankly, nothing felt peaceful. But do you feel at peace? I don't make decisions on how I feel. My daddy raised a Baptist, not a charismatic. I don't make decisions based on how I feel. Some of the things that I learned through that process, I will give you tonight. Questions that I was asked by people that I trusted with counsel, and people who had supported me and believed in me and loved me and cared that I do what was the right thing. And over time, these questions I learned to apply on a very daily basis. Which house to buy. Brother just bought a house here, and did we get the closing done on on Dad's house? Getting that done tomorrow. Praise the Lord for finally getting that all squared away. And I've had people here talk to me about, a job. Should I take this job? I was offered this job. Should I take it? Before I started working for the funeral home, when I was looking for something that would take me away from working 60 to 70 hours, I needed a job that wouldn't work me 50 to 60 hours a week like the machine shop was, because I had to have more time to put into the church. And I had two jobs that I had an opportunity to get, and I knew I would land either of those jobs that I shot for. I was going to land either of those jobs. And so it's not a matter of praying, okay, Lord, let the wrong job turn me down. They weren't going to turn me down. I knew that wasn't going to happen. So you start asking the right questions. And I want to give you 10 questions tonight when you're trying to make a decision about God's will. Now, we start with the preface of, I want to do God's will. I'm interested in what God's will is, understanding what the will of the Lord is. I'm in line with God's will. I want God's will, even if God's will isn't what I wanted. What I wanted was to go to Korea as a missionary. Does Korea need missionaries? Well, maybe, yeah. But that's not what God called me to do. I learned the difference. There's a difference between a burden and a call. I had a burden. I was, I thought, why won't God direct me concerning the mission field? I've surrendered. I'm sure he'd be jumping at the chance to get somebody to go. It became very evident to me and I'll use this phrase, write this phrase down. It's not in your notes anywhere to write it down. A providential chain of events. A providential chain of events. You want to look for that. You want to look for a providential chain of events, and that's exactly what led me to Kansas City to start a church. There was my in-laws moved there. We went there to visit them. I tried to find a church to go to, and there were none. They were all either dead liberal or liberal and dead. And the churches that were solid churches had moved way out in the boonies. They'd moved out of Kansas City proper. And I remember God speaking to me as we were at this thing called Spirit Fest, which was a 4th of July celebration, big carnival type, band at the end of it was a big, long mall type. And by mall, I don't mean shopping mall. I mean big, long strip of land with a monument at the end of it. And there's a band set up. And there are people selling junk all over the place and people eating and picnicking. And I noticed there was one group out passing out gospel tracts. And they were, and as I was walking around looking at all these people, verses in the Bible started coming to my mind. I saw what they saw, and I sat where they sat, and I was confounded. That verse kept coming back to me. And I'm looking at I remember thinking about Acts chapter 20, a city that was, Paul talked about a city, Acts chapter 8, I think it was. Well, it's where he was at Mars Hill. My brain's it might be 12. And he says he saw it as a city wholly given to idolatry, and that was Kansas City, Missouri. And as I'm walking down this mall, this big, long park, it's in a park, there's a beautiful place, and a World War I memorial, and the Union Station there in the background, just a beautiful place, and fountains and everything. And I'm looking at these masses of people with nobody witnessing to them. And I'm watching, and I'm looking on the ground, and people are walking by, and I'm looking, and they had tossed these gospel tracts on the ground. And as I'm watching, these people are walking by, stepping on these tracts as they're laying on the ground, completely oblivious to what they're stepping on. And the word of the Lord came into me saying, they have trodden underfoot the precious blood of Christ. And God began to work on me that day, leading me to start a church in Kansas City. We didn't go the next week. I wasn't ready. And we went through a couple of years of God putting me through a providential chain of events that prepared us for that moment, for us to go to Kansas City and start a work. Started a work in a storefront with 6 people in our first service in a storefront building that we had rented. And had to set up the chairs and break them down every time. It was an Oddfellows hall that had been bought out because there weren't too many Oddfellows there anymore. Everybody off the street was odd enough. They didn't need a special groom for them because this place was weird. It was in Westport. That old song, Everything's Up to Date in Kansas City, they've gone about as far as they can go. Yeah, that's right. And we had 6 people show up, and by the time I resigned from that church 14 years later, we had over 100 members, and they were in a building. And so we saw God do some great things there. Some of the things that led me to make those decisions, to make that decision, and to make other decisions that I've made about, what job to take particularly. So how do I discern God's will on a daily basis? Let me give you 10 questions to ask yourself. Number 1, have I prayed for direction? I don't care what you do with these other 9, you better start with number 1. Have I prayed about it? Man, I thought about it. I finagled about it. I worried about it. I did all this. I was trying to figure out how to do all, what do I do about this? I worried and I calculated and all this. And my pastor says, have you prayed about it? Maybe you need to back up and stop this other stuff and just pray about it. Pray about it. Now, gather as much information as you can about the situation. I'll talk about that here in a minute. But you start with praying about it. Have you prayed about have you prayed for direction? God can give you direction in a still small voice in your heart that you know that's what you're supposed to do. Number 2, am I already following what I know to be the will of God? Now, that's an important question. Am I already seeking the will of God in every other area in my life? I said this morning during Sunday school, I say I believe something because of one of 3 things, at least one of 3 things. Number 1, a biblical command, a biblical principle, or a biblical example. Biblical command, biblical principle, or biblical example. And you can get, now that has to do with just the foundational belief. What I believe about doctrine is based on that. What I believe about how to have a good marriage, or how to raise children, or how to conduct myself on a job, whether that job be secular or ministerial. It's based on a biblical command, biblical principle, or, somebody said, do you believe babies go to heaven? Well, I said, well, yes, of course I do. Why? Because that's the way it just seems like it ought to be? That's not a good enough answer. It's really not. Do I have a biblical principle? Yeah. Paul said, I have a principle. Paul said, where there is no law, there is no condemnation. Paul said the law entered in. In other words, when I gained understanding of my sinful condition, I died. The law entered in, and I died. But where there is no law, there is no condemnation. A child that does not have the ability to discern, and by the way, it's not a child that knows how to behave. Because I know a lot of wicked kids that know how to behave. They know how to manipulate, and they use behavior to do it. But they can behave. But it's the idea that they understand the concept of sin in the eyes of God. What's the first step in getting saved? First off, I have to understand that I'm a sinner. And babies don't get that. They don't understand. The law they do not have a concept of right and wrong. They do not have a concept of sin. They have not reached an age where they can be held accountable for their sin. Now, you raise up a small child, he can be held accountable for his actions, but for him to understand the concept, or for her to understand the concept of sin, as in a violation of God's will, that's a different thing. They have to be able to understand that. Say, do you have an example? I do have an example of a child that died and went to heaven. When David and Bathsheba's first child died, what did David say? He said, he cannot be with me, but I can go and be with him. Well, that tells me that David was going to the same place that child was. And there are a lot of things. I can give you a dozen different ideas and principles as to why I believe that, or why the Bible would discern that. But the question is, am I already doing look, if you're not already doing the will of God, I'm looking for God's will concerning this thing. Well, are you faithful to the Lord's house? Are you praying? Are you reading the scripture? Are you daily in prayer? Are you daily in the scripture? Are you living a holy, separated life? Are you serving in the church? Are you tithing? Are you doing all these things that the Bible commands us to do anyway? Because if you're not following the commands, you're not going to get this other stuff. Somebody tells me, well, I believe it's God's will for me to go work in the jails. You're not even going to church. Why would you go work in the jails? I think it's God's will that you start going to church before you go starting ministries. So, by the way, I went to a Bible college, and I told my wife, we had this discussion when I was in Bible college. I said, I don't think this is the right way to set up a Bible college. Because the Bible college was independent and it was supported by dozens of other churches. And what happens when you have dozens of people telling you how to run your business? It can become a problem. Every Bible college I've seen, every seminary I've seen that was not attached to a local New Testament church. Is it a ministry? If it's a ministry, it's supposed to be attached to a local New Testament church. They got a school down the road here. Those are nice people down there. They have PE in our backyard, and they use our parking lot on Grandparents' Day. And we have a great relationship with them, with Morning Star, that school down there. And it is a charter school run by parents. And in that regard, I will cut them some slack. But what that is a charter parent-run. It is a parent-run charter school that teaches a Christian curriculum. It is not a Christian school. You say, well, it's a Christian school. There are Christian schools that are not attached to churches. That's not biblical. If you're going to have a Christian school, it should be the ministry of a local New Testament church. Because all ministry is supposed to be attached to the local New Testament church. That's why I don't receive, that's why we don't accept the baptism of somebody that got baptized by the Salvation Army or by some evangelist out here in his backyard swimming pool. I'm not being sarcastic or that, but I know of that happening. I mean, I know some evangelists baptizing people in a swimming pool, not attached to a church anywhere. That's not biblical. If you're not doing what is biblical to start with, don't tell me you're looking for the will of God, because you're already overlooking the will of God. You're not going to find any more of it. Number 3, have I sought godly counsel? I was 100% convinced that God called me to start a church in Kansas City. Was I wrong? Absolutely not. I was absolutely correct. And I went to my pastor and I told him so, and he said, you're not ready. He didn't say never. He just said not now. There's some things, he said, as your pastor, there are some things I want to see grow in your life. You need to be stronger in these areas. And I submitted to that, and I'll always be grateful that I submitted to that, because it made the difference. I saw young men that didn't submit to that. Well, I'll charge hell with a squirt gun. Yeah, and you're going to get burned. You know, I know, bless God, I know God called me. Wait a minute. If God put godly leadership over you, godly spiritual leadership over you, and that godly spiritual leadership, i.e. my pastor, says, this isn't right, it's not right for you yet, it may be down the road, but this isn't what you need to do right now. There's some areas you need to work on to strengthen in your walk with Christ and in your relationship and in your ministry. You need to strengthen some things before you get out there in the minefield. And I turn my nose up at it, then I'm going to end up out of the will of God. You know, if something can be the will of God and you can get ahead of it. I'm getting ahead of myself here because that is. Have you sought godly counsel? Proverbs 11:14, where no counsel is, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors there is safety. Listen, I know a couple that they went off to pastor's school. The wife took her kids and they went to a meeting in Hammond, Indiana, to a week-long Bible conference that they had in Hammond, Indiana. Massive church, good church, solid church, Bible church. Great man of God was in the pulpit at the time. He's in heaven now. They got a great man in the pulpit now, too. Brother Wilkerson, he's a friend of mine, John Wilkerson. He's a pastor at First Baptist Hammond, and I have great respect for him, and I love him, and he's a friend. We're talking about a church that runs 10,000. I mean, this is an amazing church. It's incredible. It's hard to even believe without being there and seeing it and grasping it. Good, strong, solid King James Bible preaching, soul winning church. They got Christian schools. They have Hyles-Anderson College, Bible College there. Great school, great church. And this family went off to this conference. And the wife came back with her two little kids, two teenagers. And announced to her husband, we're moving to Hammond. It's God's will. Our kids need to be in that school up there. And the husband is like, I don't know if that's the best idea. You know, it's interesting. God didn't lay anything on the heart of the head of the household. Major red flag. No, we're moving to Hammond. I'm moving with or without you. We're going to Hammond. So they went in the middle of the largest recession that we'd had. It was back in the 80s. Terry knew this family. She's very close to this family, and I knew them kind of after the fact. And they about starved to death because, can I tell you something about Indiana and Illinois and Chicagoland area during the 80s? Okay, the unemployment rate was about 25%. I am not kidding you. Factories were shut down everywhere. Hardly anybody had work. And they moved to one of the worst economies at one of the worst times that they possibly could have, because it's God's will for my kids to be in that school, even though my pastor was against it, my husband was against it. None of my friends were in favor of it, but bless God, this is what we're supposed to do. By the way, they ended up divorced and out of church completely. All of them. The whole family. None of them ended up in church at all anywhere. And I blame the mother. She got out of the will of God knowing it was the will of God. Godly counsel. For by wise counsel thou shalt make war, and in a multitude of counselors there is safety. Without counsel, purposes are disappointed, but in the multitude of counselors they are established. So I got under my pastor and I rooted in and I did I said, okay, you show me where I'm lacking. You show me what I need to learn. You teach me what I need to know, and I will stay under your authority until you tell me otherwise. And 2 years later, that church sent us out as a church plant out of Trinity Baptist Church in Arlington, and we went to Kansas City and started that church, and God blessed it. But the question is, have I sought godly counsel? Number 4, I gotta hurry. Number 4, will this decision bring me closer or farther in my relationship with God or His service? Man comes to the pastor's office and he says, I've been offered a real good job over here. Really? Over where? Well, the next state over. Okay, you've got a good, strong church. Your kids are in a good, strong Christian school here. Your wife is happy. You have a home where she's happy and everything. Is there a good church over there? Well, there are some churches nearby. I mean, they're not, the strongest churches, but there's a few. Oh, is there a strong Christian school? Is there a support for your family in that regard? Well, no, but the public schools are real good. My kids are in public school, and I'll tell you, we get a lot of support from our public school system that some are not afforded, can I tell you? And even that, I keep my thumb on it. Guarantee it. To the tune of about a half a dozen emails a week, back and forth and back and forth. They are very good about it. And the principal at the junior high school said, look, this was to a whole group of parents, said, you are the parents of these children. You know what's best for your children. I thought, I can get on board with this guy. He thinks the parents are in charge. There are parents who have gotten up in PTA meetings and said, hey, I don't like the way you're running this school. I don't like what you're teaching my kid. And they got reported to the FBI. That's our government for you. But I've seen men take their children out of a good, strong church for the purpose of a really good job. And what did they get out of it? They got a job making a lot of money, and they lost their family. Well, I've got a great opportunity for a job, Pastor. Really? Yeah. Of course, I won't be able to come to church anymore. There's a problem. Will this decision bring you closer or farther in my relationship with God and His service? Number 5. Will it require a compromise of your principles or convictions? I had a chance to get a job at a company. It was in the warehouse running their ship. I was going to run their shipping and receiving department, mainly their receiving. It was a good, solid company and good pay and good benefits. And I'm talking to the guy, and it was Fox Distribution. And I was talking to one of the two brothers, Mr. Fox, that ran the thing. And he was a real nice guy, Catholic fellow. And he said, okay, what are you involved in outside? I said, well, I'm actually a church planter. We're starting a church here in Kansas City, and I'm the pastor of Trinity Independent Baptist Church. I'm doing this job. I'm bivocational because it's a new church. And, they don't pay, so I got to have a job. He said, that's very admirable. He said, I can really respect that, and I admire it. He's being real nice to me. And he said, you're Baptist. I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I wouldn't hold that against you. Well, that's good. He said, I'm Catholic. I said, well, I wouldn't hold that against you. And he was being real kind. He said, but here's what, just for your information, I want you to know what we do here in our distribution center. I said, okay. He said, do you know anything about beer kegs? I said, not really. I've seen them. He said, do you know what a tap is? I said, well, yeah, actually, I do know what you're talking about a beer tap? The thing you pours beer out of the... He said, yeah. Like the fountain drinks, but it's to pull the handle and it's a beer keg under there. And that system they use? Yeah. He said, that's what we make. Oh, that's what you make. He said, now, I'm not saying I wouldn't hire you, but you need, if you're Baptist, and I know you Baptists don't drink. That was back when Baptists had a reputation of not drinking. Had somebody ask me, are you a wet Baptist or a dry Baptist? Had somebody ask me that one time. I said, yeah, dry, very dry. our church, a man would have to be primed before he could spit. I mean, we're dry, okay? And he said, I just want you to be aware before you make the decision of taking a job at this company that we provide equipment for bars and beer distributors. That's what we do. Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate that, and I will respectfully decline this interview and cut this off because I don't want to waste any more of your time because I'm not going to work. Hey, it would have paid really good, though. Would have paid really good. I had a chance to work in avionics. I had a job in avionics. I had a chance to become a technical writer on manuals about inspection protocol for overhauling aircraft engines and aircraft engine components, not full engines, but aircraft engine components. It was either that or the door had opened up for me to go pastor a church. Do I take this position or I go pastor a church? Well, guess which one I took? Bye-bye avionics. I loved you while I had you, but I'm moving on. That was the course of my life. I knew that was my calling, and that would have kept me from my calling. Is this something that is going to cause you to compromise your convictions or your principles? I didn't want to, I got a job delivering equipment to nursing homes, not bars. Live by principle. Does this undermine your integrity? Do I have to compromise my standards or my integrity in order to take this job? I got to hurry. Number 6. How did the decision affect others who made it? How'd that work out for everybody else? By the way, that thing about staying under my pastor, I had seen how that worked out for everybody else that didn't. Psalm 107 says, He poureth contempt upon princes and causeth them to wander in the wilderness, where there is no way. Yet setteth He the poor on high from affliction, and maketh him families like a flock. The righteous shall see it and rejoice, and all iniquity shall stop her mouth. Whoso is wise and will observe these things, even they shall understand the loving kindness of the Lord. One of the criteria for being wise is that you observe what goes on in other people's lives. Well, how did that work out for somebody else? How did that fare for them? How did that affect others when they made that decision? Did it help them? Did it hinder them? Whoso is wise and will observe these things. When I was in ROTC in high school, and I had my commander, I had my ROTC commander he was Commander A.T. McKinney, West Point. He was an Annapolis graduate, combat veteran from World War II. And he made the statement to me one time. He said, "Get your lessons secondhand, Mr. Cannon. They're cheaper that way." I had to think about it for a minute. Oh, I see what you mean. Learn from your mistakes, but it's easier to learn from other people's mistakes. Learn from them. Number 7, do you have all the facts? Do you have all the facts? Are you making an intelligent decision? Are you making an intelligent decision? Or in other words, are you getting all of the information you can? Gather all the information, get all the facts you can gather about a situation before you make the decision. I'm trying to decide between these two jobs. Well, what are the benefits? Well, I don't know. What's the pay like? Is it going to make you, is it going to take you away from church? Do you know that? Do you have to work on Sundays? Do you have to work on weekends? Are they going to shift you around on shifts and go crazy with that? Does this job pay better than this job? You're just gathering information. Will it pay my bills? Will the benefits, will paying for the insurance be worth it? My insurance is expensive, but it's worth what I pay for it. The other company, not so much, that I used to work for. There were guys who quit. I used to work for that machine shop down there, and there were guys that left the job because after they paid for the insurance on a wife and 3 kids, they had nothing. They about owed the company money, because their insurance was so expensive that they could not afford to live on what they were netting, because they were paying out more than they were in taxes and benefits. They were paying more than they were bringing home. Get all the facts. How long, ye simple ones, will you love simplicity, and scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge? Learn, grow, discern. Number 8, what is your mental state? Now, here's something that's important. I'm going long tonight, but you need this. What is your mental state? Never make major decisions during an emotional extreme, either high or low. Oh, you get real excited. I'm all pumped up. Man, this is great. This meeting's been like a pep rally. Now buy my timeshare. All right, man, where do I sign? That's a bad time to make a decision. When when your emotions are extremely high, or when your emotions are just extremely low. I'm depressed, I'm brokenhearted, I'm shattered. That's not a good time to make a decision. My sister, whose husband died, she said, if I had to do over again, I'd have waited 6 months before I did anything like sell the house, change my job, anything like that. She made some decisions that later on she ended up unmaking, because, she made those decisions during a time of grief and sorrow, and the grief made the decision. Don't let your emotions make the decision. Never let your emotions be a motivation. God does not work through your emotions. Your emotions don't make the decision. Biblical principle makes the decision. Number 8. Number 9, does it require a decision right now? I had a car dealer say to me, what am I going to have to do to get you into that brand new car today? I said, you're going to have to give it to me. He said, well, that's not going to happen. I said, well, neither is me buying one today. I said, look, if I buy this car from you, it's going to be the biggest investment I make in the next 10 years. It's going to be the biggest amount of money I spend. You think I'm not going to sleep on it first before I spend that kind of money? Before I go $10,000 in debt, or $20 or $50 or $70 or $80,000? I think it's $90,000 for those for an SUV, typical SUV pickup truck, brand new, running 80,000. Oh, but you can get a real good payment. Why are they financing vehicles for 10 years? 10 years. I have never financed a vehicle for over 5 years. That one was brand new. When I bought it, it had 123 miles on it. It's the only brand new car I ever bought. And I was priced out of the market a long time. What is your mental state? Number 1, does it require that you make the decision right now? Somebody said, hey, I need a decision today. I said, well, if you need a decision today, the answer is no. My wife and I, when we first got married, we had a rule. You don't spend $50 without waiting 24 hours. I mean, we're going to go buy groceries or whatever. That was, but I mean, we're not going to buy any item, impulse buy any item for over $50. Of course, now $50 doesn't even buy lunch at Pizza Hut for my family. So, we had to raise that up a little bit. But if it has to happen right now, I'd be very cautious. This deal is only good today, and I pass. No salesman, if a salesman ever tells, I don't care, it may be a great deal, but any salesman that tells me you have to make a decision today, then the decision is no. Number 10, does it lead to temptation? Jesus taught us to pray, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Will this put me in a position to where I would be tempted? And is this job going to lead me to a place where I have a sin weakness in that particular area or whatever? When you're making a decision about God's will, you have to get out of yourself. You have to remember you're looking for God's will, not yours. And you don't discern that on a carnal level. And be not conformed in this world. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, from a carnal mind to a spiritual mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Let's all stand. I got to quit. So, preacher, God spoke to my heart tonight through the message. Say, preacher, pray for me. God spoke to my heart through the message tonight. Pray, thank you. Thank you. God bless you and you. I see those hands. We're going to have a couple of invitations.